Hey YouTube, so this is Kristen, and I decided it's time to start to tell a little more about my story. So this is part one, and probably two parts. And I'm telling my story in a way that could teach a little bit about the development of DID and why my brain may have went towards splitting in DID and some of the signs and symptoms that came along the way since childhood through adolescence and into my 20s. And so I will mention ages and time periods of trauma, but I will not mention the details of too much of the trauma. There is one trauma that happened in my young adulthood that I will mention a little bit more detail in. So trigger warning, I won't mention any details of sexual abuse or physical abuse or anything like that, but I will give a little more of the story and how that affected the alter's development. And so I'm hoping to tell the story in a way that can educate on the disorder and not exactly like I'm just going to open up and tell all my dirty secrets, so to speak. So, part one. I was born to two handicapped parents, which put me constitutionally at a predisposition, a sensitivity. One being mentally ill and one being physically disabled, unable to like carry me around or have all the same bonding and nurturing normalities that go along with mothering. And I was born preemie, and while in the womb, my mother was very depressed and stressed. My father was really drinking heavily at that time, who is sober now. I'm very proud of him. He's been sober a long time, like over 10 years or around 10 years. So this is not to talk bad on anyone in my family. This video is not for that. And it's not for sympathy. It's just to teach the timeline of the development and things I noticed. So my first trauma that I remember happened around age 6, maybe 6.5. And due to the way it went, it may have happened younger where I don't remember, but I'm not sure. And it happened enough times that I felt unsafe. And I also didn't understand what was going on. It was from someone that I trusted, and I didn't understand if it was wrong, but I knew it felt wrong. It was very confusing for me. And then in the same year of that happening, I had similar traumas of that happen with another trusted person very close to me, and also a similar trauma happened with a neighbor, friend and sibling very close to me. So it all happened from my memory in the same year of being a child. And it was a little much because what I felt was that I would be in trouble if I told anyone. And so I didn't want to tell anyone. And that's the first start of where I noticed a shift in my thinking and my self-awareness, in fact. I was taken to be screened for the trauma, and I caught on what they were doing and asking through their questions. And I felt very ashamed at that age and very much like I would be in trouble with my parents if I was to say anything. So I didn't. I knew how to lie. I didn't say anything, and I didn't have anyone to turn to talk about how it made me feel, because all I knew was that was bad, that was wrong, I was a part of it, and I'm gonna be in the worst trouble ever. And, spanking was a hefty option in my family, so I had a big fear of being in trouble. So I didn't tell. Not until way later in life, in my teens. My parents then, within that year, next year, very, very close to that, split and got divorced. And some of the trauma happened during the separation. And there were other instances of unusual scenarios of not violence, but threatened violence with weapons and other things that happened. And so I started to feel very unsafe, but didn't really know why that would be, because they were people I felt I should feel safe around. And I remember during the trauma time period beginning to talk to myself a lot more in the mirror. That was the first time I realized that I could talk to myself, and I had always had some form of childhood insomnia that I couldn't sleep. Not too bad. I'm not going to say it was full-fledged insomnia, but it was close. It was very hard for me to sleep. And I learned late at night, while my mind was racing, that I could talk to myself in the mirror, and would also have, imaginary friends, and the names would always be Michael or Matthew, and often be stronger counterparts to what I was, wiser. I would pray and talk to Jesus and Santa. I thought they were very helping, loving sources to go to. I was raised in a church, very religious, and I sat on my grandma's lap till I was like 11. It was a little strange. But I was raised a Lutheran, and so I knew that there could be angels around watching me, and I kind of just was aware that talking to myself, that I felt other presence around me, and it excited me that I could have friends, but it was all a little cloudy. I had my first hallucination during that year as well, of trauma and separation, just of spiders all over the house and walls in my body that I couldn't shake off. It was like night terrors. And I even walked to my parents' room like, don't you see them? They're everywhere. And, it's a very strange thing. But that only happened that one time in my life, so I'm not sure what that was about. I started getting very afraid, and I didn't know what about, so I would make up stories like, well, someone's going to come in the house and kill us all, so how will I escape? Will I hide under my bed? I really need a trap door. I need a trap door under a rug, and I felt a sense of needing to escape danger a lot. I was running away. I started running away as a toddler, which makes me think I was imprinted by possible loud arguments and other unsafe feelings before my trauma, because I started running away at my window at age 3, I was told, and would go into the woods across the house. And I kept running away, and I got in severe trouble, spanking with a belt, pretty severely for that. And I know that I was traumatized that night because I was so happy just to go out on a camping trip with me and my friends. I thought I was going to get some friends to go, and when I came home, because my friends weren't brave enough to sneak out of their houses, and I was only like 6, I got spanked really hard, really long with a belt, and I was a little traumatized and disassociated for the first time that I can recall. I think I might have disassociated during my trauma, but because my memory stops at a certain point. and it's pretty cloudy, but who knows. So that's kind of the childhood part. I started, so moving on to mental health signs. I started having eating disorder, body obsession, feeling like I didn't like my body around age 9. And it just grew and grew until by the time I was 11, I was doing like 1,000 sit-ups a day to get abs, and I was always trying to be perfect. I started to develop an eating disorder by age 12, but hid it really well. Sneaking food, binge eating, and avoiding food, and trying to work out, but nothing consistent until 13. 13 really started realizing I wanted to be a part of the anorexia scene. There's a whole scene out there on the website, and I found a lot of friends through that online, and would vent my feelings in those places, and would be cheered on for eating very low calories. And I just kind of stuck with it. We moved to an apartment with a gym and a tennis court and basketball court and a pool, and I would work out and do those sports and run and exercise a lot of my hours and eat, 250 calories a day. I mean, very, very little. So I had a bout of that, and it really messed with my sleep. I couldn't sleep. I had a lot of insomnia. I still functioned very well in school. I made straight A's in school with very little sleep. I didn't do homework. I just did well on tests, and I went to a really big school, so they were more based on testing than homework. I'm not sure why that was, but sports probably plays a role in that. And I really just didn't want to be present anymore. I wanted to research everything, research religion, research anorexia, exercise. I started staying awake and being really spiritual, really considering being a pastor because of the presence I felt when I would pray and talk to angels and God, and I would always feel other presence in the room and around me. And I would change. I would become this dancing, spiritual person. I did spiritual liturgical dance for church, and so I really started becoming one with that moving, trance-like, half asleep, spiritual prayer state. And that kind of integrated with Alaya, one of my main altars out of 2. I have more than 2, but one of 2 of my main altars that I switch into. And I would do art and draw, and I loved that space that I was in, and I liked being alone. I was very lonely, though. As much as I liked my alone hobbies, I was very lonely. I felt very unliked at school. I was bullied and picked on throughout ages 9 to 14. I was picked on for this freckle here. It's a freckle. I was picked on for that. I was picked on for my clothes and being white, actually. I went to one of the top diversity schools in this country and was violently picked on there for being freshly moved from Tennessee, so I don't have that accent anymore. I got rid of the accent. And I also, a sign that I feel is I really felt a presence in baby dolls and in the real life babies, and I named them Michael and Matthew a lot. Those names always stuck out with me. I was bonding with imaginary things and hobbies and unhealthy coping mechanisms. And apparently what I don't remember is one day I just walked out half naked from the shower with towels around my head and body, and I said, "Mom, I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore. I need help." I don't remember that, but she took me to a mental hospital, and I was treated for anorexia and diagnosed bipolar. My father was diagnosed bipolar at that same year after what was pretty much known as a suicide attempt, a pretty intense one, that put him in a coma for a while. And so they just assumed that I also carried that gene. And they did not go over trauma, and I didn't open my mouth about any trauma, so I didn't get the right help I needed. I was put on medication, which did sedate me and calm me down, but then ended up having a mental break on them. At 15, huddled in a ball, crying, and just not myself. So I got off of them and started really defying my mother, really not trusting her judgment on how I needed to be helped. It was all centralized around my eating disorder and perfectionism and bipolar, and I knew deep down that there was issues, but I had gone so long not talking about them that I didn't really see how they affected me. I moved out for the first time from my mom's home at 15 and a half or 16, right in there. It's probably 16, and with a boyfriend who was very abusive, emotionally, mentally, and more so, which I won't go into. And I thought I loved him and he was the one, and that turned into abuse, and so we ended up breaking up, and I came back home for a little while, tried the school thing again because I couldn't do that on my own, and found myself in a really deep depression, having that freedom that I had and then having no freedom. Had to be watched all the time. As a 16-year-old by my grandma, I had to, no internet. I couldn't have my own phone. It was just very locked down in comparison. I got really depressed. And I really felt that for whatever reason that my mother didn't care about me, the person I really was. Like, she cared about me as a daughter, but didn't like who I was and care about me, and that I was just a nuisance. And I was very down on myself, and it's not to speak ill of my mother, but we just did not get along at all. Teenage stuff, I guess, a little extreme. And so I started considering the military, to give me some structure and a system that I could trust. One of my teachers was in the Navy, and so she convinced me that I was smart enough to just go in the military. My school convinced me prior to that I should just get my GED and move on to college because of not really getting along in school. Like, I never fought people in school or anything like that, but I just would hide out. I was always like in the library. I didn't want to be around anybody. I didn't participate in classes. I would sleep in the day in classes and be up at night, and I just wasn't functioning well. And it was obvious to teachers, but I still managed to make straight A's at that low function level. And so they just suggested I take a break and maybe go to college after a GED. And they didn't say figure my mental health out, but my mother told them about it. And so with the arguments with my mother, I was not able to really do a lot on my own. I had to get federally emancipated to get into a little bit of college. I did do that for a little while, but then made poor choices I had suicidal depression, and I didn't know what to do anymore, so I made poor choices, and for 3 months of my life I was addicted to drugs, ecstasy, which made me happy. And I started doing a little cocaine, and I can proudly say that was only a 3-month stint in my life when I was 18. But then when I hit rock bottom in the wrong group of people, seeing gang life and being homeless through winter and like really hard times, I knew that I needed to get out of the state and just start life over again. And I was afraid to go in the military at that point, with how low functioning I was, and knowing they might not take me with mental illness. So I got my last scholarship check from college, and I moved states, and I wanted to start over fresh. And I did for a while. And I did well. I felt independent. I got my own apartment. I had a cashier job, and I was paying all my own bills off that job. And I went back to the abusive relationship that I had been in before. He lived in this other state, and that did not go well. It went really bad. Emotionally very hard on me, and jumped to another boyfriend, and he just was not emotionally ready for any kind of commitment whatsoever. And so I was really codependent, and he wasn't able to handle anything of my mess. I was really a lot of drama for him, I think. And so then this is going to end part one, and we'll start part two. So I realized that my only option to get money for college for good and to straighten out my life would be to join the military. And so I found a recruiter and began working out with him, getting in shape, preparing, figuring out what I needed to do to get in the military successfully and be my best prepared. So I quit my job. I started living off credit cards and preparing for the military. So that's going to end part one, and part two will come soon. This is ending at age 19 or so. I'm 29 now, so part two circles around the military trauma that I've had, and it's going to be brief because this is online. So stay tuned for part two.